Good evening, everyone. I'm Giuliano Bifolchi, Research Manager at SpecialEurasia and Housing Unit Director. And today we have a special guest with us, Vicken Cheterian. Hi, Vicken. How are you?
Hi, Giuliano. I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. A long day, and thanks again to be with us. It's a great pleasure and honor for us. And today we will focus on Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, as the Armenian usually call this region that in the past was a de facto republic, but today is part of Azerbaijani territory. And we also discuss how the Nagorno-Karabakh has impacted in the past and today the Armenian dynamics and the Caucasus dynamics. We're doing this with Vicken because he is the author of several books, but I would like to focus more on two books that's one you edited and the other one you participated with in one chapter. So the first book is the 43rd Day War, Armenia-Azerbaijan and the Struggle for Nagorno-Karabakh. This is the book that you, if I'm not mistaken, you edited, right?
That's right, yes.
So we can see like the banner and the cover of the book, and you co-edited it, and it was now it's open access and it's possible to read from Raspberry, right? If I'm not mistaken.
That's right. It's open access, so anyone can download the whole book or individual chapters.
Okay, good to know. And the other one is the book that you wrote. A chapter is the book is titled "Defeat: Documented the Karabagh War 2020." So let's go to see. Okay, this is one. You wrote a chapter on this book, and your chapter, if I'm not mistaken, was also a sort of a series of interviews with political figures in this book, or it was I'm mistaken something?
No, that's right. I mean, my chapter in Defeat, it's a very long chapter. It's more than 50 pages, and it is based on 35 interviews done with 31 political, military, and other leaders from Armenia and Karabakh. And the idea of this chapter is to reconstruct the war and to understand what happened.
Okay. Thanks again. So this is a book that you, apart from your contribution, there are contributions also of Ashot Voskanyan, Karen Harutunian, and Mktrich Karapenian and Haik Hovanesyan. So all the authors are from Armenia, have Armenian roots. Let's see.
Absolutely, that's right. And it was first published in Armenia.
Okay, yeah.
And this one that we see on the screen is the English translation that was just published.
Okay, and people can find like on the Gomitas Institute, if I'm not mistaken, like they can buy like the physical copy or the book, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Gomitas Institute, it's London-based, so you can go to their website and order it from there or from other web pages that sell books, like Amazon.
Yeah, there are so many now. We live in this online world, interconnect world. True. And thanks God that it was translated. Now more people can have access to this work. So why we decided to invite Vicken? So now we are looking at a small summary of who you are. Let's say that your CV is so impressive, so you are a scholar, a researcher, a journalist. You speak several languages like Arabic, if I'm not mistaken, Armenian, English, probably also French.
Yes, I do, of course. Yeah, I live in Geneva. I work here. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So now you are based in Geneva, and you work as a fellow, associate fellow in Geneva, but you also write articles for different media outlets, different newspapers, and you also author several books. Because today you told me that sometimes just an article or paper is not enough, so you need to dedicate a book for a specific topic, right?
Right. It's the best way to learn something, to write a book about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So let's go on. Let's start with this interview. And I want to ask, the first things that I want really to ask is that, in your first chapter of the book, 43rd Day War, just say this, I don't use the longest title. So you say that Armenia has this triple challenge because Armenia faced a war against Azerbaijan, but also faced the challenge with Turkey because, since the 90s, Turkey has closed any kind of relationship, diplomatic relationship at the border with Armenia. But at the same time, Armenia faces also the challenge of Russia, like it be too probably much dependent on from to Russia. So the question is, okay, this triple challenge, of course, affected the 44 days of war of Nagorno-Karabakh and also the last years of the existence of the republic. But my question is how also this kind of triple challenge is affecting now the dynamics in the Caucasus.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the geopolitics of the region. Modern Armenian independence started with the Karabakh struggle. So the Armenian national movement that led to independence, it was initially about Karabakh. And this brought to a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And in this conflict initially was part of the Soviet Union, right? Both Armenia and Azerbaijan were part of the Soviet Union. And this conflict was an internal conflict of the Soviet Union. And both Armenia and Azerbaijan, they were looking towards Moscow to be the judge. And in this process, Moscow chose status quo. And this was in favor of Azerbaijan and against what Armenians were wishing. So as a result, Armenian national movement from 1988 clashed with Russia, with Moscow, with the Soviet leadership. And early on, Armenia had no other choice. If it clashed with Russia, again, geopolitics of the region, had to look westwards. And west, when you are in Armenia, is Turkey. So that's why, yeah, I mean, for Armenia, west is not Austria, it's not Germany, it's not France, it's Turkey. And the Armenian national movement back then, they tried to establish normal relations with Turkey, but they failed. And as a result, Armenia had to go back and to build an alliance with Russia. And this alliance in the Second Karabagh War in 2020 proved to be something not reliable. Russia did not support Armenia. Even Russia tolerated in 2020 that Turkey, a NATO member, sent its generals, ships, Syrian mercenaries, sent aviation, F-16, Bayraktar drones to manage Azerbaijan's war against Karabakh and against Armenia. So this is the situation. And after several deceptions on the Armenian side, 2020 war was the beginning, but it was not the end. In 2022, September, Azerbaijan attacked Armenia proper. And there again, Russia, as the military ally of Armenia, was totally absent. Russia did not even condemn the attack. And then we have September 2023, when Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, what was left of it, and the Russian peacekeepers that were positioned in Karabakh, they did not act, they just abandoned the Armenian population. So after all these deceptions, now the authorities in Armenia, they are trying to distance themselves from Russia. Basically, they have no other choice, I mean, after all this, and they are trying to have good relations with the West. Again, this is not easy because, as I said, for Armenia, the West starts with Turkey, and Turkey up to now, in spite of all the efforts of the Pashinyan administration, keeps the border closed and does not have diplomatic relations with Armenia.
Thanks. Meanwhile, you were speaking, we just share an infographic regarding like the main events. Okay, we should. Today I was thinking about which kind of events I can put in this infographic. And there were so many events. I say just try to focus the attentions of the people that probably they are not familiar or they don't remember pretty well like all the dynamics. I still remember that a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, in 2024, but also in 2025, Pashinyan several times complained regarding Russia and say that one of the main mistakes of the previous administration, like with Serge Sargsyan, was like relying on just on Russia, as you also mentioned, and because then what probably the main problem was that Russia did intervene, and we should also contextualize what's happening, the fact that Russia was involved in the Ukraine conflict, and several people, several analysts argue that since Russia was involved in the Ukraine conflict, just left the Turkish-Azerbaijani alliance to take back the Nagorno-Karabakh. But going back to what you wrote,
just a minute. I want to comment on this. I agree partially about this last comment. I think in 2023, when Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, the 2,000 or even less Russian peacekeepers couldn't do much because Russia was in war in Ukraine. But 2020, when the second Karabagh War happened, the Ukraine war had not started yet, and Russia had the means to pressure Azerbaijan and also to limit Turkish intervention, and Russia did not do that. Putin tolerated for 44 days that the alliance between Azerbaijan and Turkey destroys Armenian armed forces. And when Putin decided to stop the war, 44 days later, he did stop the war. So back in 2020, Russia had means to manage the conflict in the Caucasus. And I think Russia wanted that this war happens and probably wanted to punish Pashinyan. And
this is what I would like to ask you, because, I still remember in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, during the May parade, which celebrate the victory of the Great War, like for Russia. I still remember that Pashinyan was absent and was just probably the Ministry of Armenia or the Ministry of Defense just took part, and there was a little bit scandal. And also some Russian media outlets and think tanks after the Velvet Revolution in 2018 started complaining about Pashinyan because they look at Pashinyan as how can I say, someone linked also to this color revolution as what happened in 2014 in Ukraine and before in Georgia. So I agree with you, was a punishment in 2020, because 44 days was a long period to tolerate what is happening. I agree with you. I also agree with you the fact that in 2023 they had a peacekeeper, and if I'm not mistaken, a couple of peacekeepers, also Russian soldiers, died because of Azerbaijani airstrikes or shelling. So I can agree with you that's probably was also part of the geopolitics or the strategies of the Russian Federation. But if I can ask this question, because in the 44-day war in your books, you state that what you said before was that during these 44 days, Azerbaijan was supported by Turkey, but also there were Syrian mercenaries. So this means that the Caucasus wasn't just an isolated region, because in this case, was directly connected and linked to the Middle East, to the post-Soviet space. And so the question is if also we look at the narrative or rhetoric of Pashinyan, if the government now in Armenia is using a sort of double standard policy or double standard narrative where they say that they try to downplay this situation, that the fact now that what happened in 2020 contextualize all the conflict in a broader region. So this means that Armenia also should think with international overview, not just thinking about what is happening in the region. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you are absolutely right. In academia, up to 2020, we thought that the South Caucasus was part of the post-Soviet space. So we, university people, researchers, academics, lecturers, we thought that we should teach the South Caucasus as part of Eastern Europe, Russia, Soviet, post-Soviet history. and basically people who had training in Russian language, Russian history, Soviet history, were concerned with this region. And this was very artificial because Moscow is further away from Yerevan than Tabriz, than Erbil, than Diyarbakir, and even Ankara. So, and the history of the region, you cannot teach history of Armenia and Armenians by putting it in the box of Eastern Europe. It is Armenians are a Middle Eastern people. They are part of this broader Middle East, what is now Turkey, what used to be the Ottoman Empire, the Iranian history. There's an Armenian neighborhood in old part of Jerusalem for 14 centuries, even more. So Armenians are Middle Eastern people, and you cannot teach their history or the history of Azerbaijan or the history of Chechnya only by putting it in Eastern Europe. So you have to open up, and this is our intellectual failure as academics. And 2020 was very much a shock for all those who thought that the South Caucasus was exclusively part of post-Soviet history, because not only Turkey intervened militarily in a war there, but also there were two other forces that were present in the Second Karabagh War. Thousands of Syrian mercenaries, but also Israel. Israel gave massive military aid to Azerbaijan. And Israel is very much present in Azerbaijan because of Israeli interests vis-a-vis Iran. So this is all very well known and documented. So I think Armenia is learning that it cannot only rely on Russia, that its fate is also related with the Middle East. And for the moment, I don't see that Armenia has a very clear strategy what to do. So what they are doing is trial and error. They are experimenting things.
So thanks. Oh, I agree with you. Okay, I belong also to academic world, and let's say sometimes when you have to research on the Caucasus, you have this big dilemma also for the papers, academic papers. So should publish in Eastern European history or Middle East or post-Soviet space or this and that. Let's say that there was some books, interesting books, like they describe the Caucasus as a border, barrier, and bridge between Europe and Asia, between also the Christian Orthodox world and the Arab Muslim world. And let's say that the geographic position of the Caucasus is really, specific and particular. And this is also the reason why it's sometimes hard to contextualize everything. Because I agree with you that Armenia, we can consider more close to the Middle East than to Eastern Europe or Russia. But it's also the first Christian nations in the world. So it's also close to Rome or to Italy, for instance, and to the Christian world. And for centuries, it represent also a sort of outpost or barrier to the Islamic conquest or also advance. So the fact is that it's a country, and also the Caucasus, it's fascinating, complicated. Sometimes just using labels is not the right choice, the right option, according to me. I don't know if you agree with this.
I agree. I mean, the thing is that to simplify complex questions, we need to create concepts. We need to create boxes. But we also need to question our concepts. And we need to critically engage with the boxes we create. And we put whole histories and civilizations in these boxes. You just mentioned that Armenia is the first Christian nation. But and then you linked it with Rome and with Europe. But I mean, Christianity is a Middle Eastern religion, right? Before arriving to Rome, Christianity developed.
You're right. You're completely
in places
right.
like Syria, right? Assyrians were the first carriers of this religion. So, I mean, we should always be careful with the ideas we create, because we should be conscious that we are simplifying things to understand complex issues, but at the same time, we should keep critical distance with our own ideas and with our own concepts.
Yeah, you're completely right. So you just defeat me, but not jokes apart, you're completely right. So going back to your chapter you wrote for the book Defeat, which is like a book with different chapters from different authors from Armenia. So this chapter is based on 35 interviews with 31 political and military figures from Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. What is interesting is that if we see like the recent history of Armenia, looking more to the domestic politics, so let's say that we say that there is a sort of a leadership gap apart from Pashinyan and probably Chetarian, or like in the opposition, even though in the past election Chetarian wasn't capable also to, how can I say, to unify all the opposition's movements in the country. So there is a sort of leadership gap now, or so how is the domestic politics?
So there are two things there when we talk about leadership. First is that 2018 was a major change. It was a revolution where the old leadership and the old style of managing the state was overthrown, and new guys, young guys, without any experience in state matters, came to power. And the people who left power, like Serge Sarkisian, he was in the system since 1993. So before that, he was the defense minister of Karabakh. And in 1993, he became the head of the intelligence of Armenia. And then he played very important roles as the defense minister, prime minister, president, and so on. So for more than 2 decades, more than something like 27 years, people like Serge Sarkisian, Robert Chetarian, and people around them who emerged from the first Karabagh War, they managed the state. And they did it very often in an informal way. They didn't create strong institutions, but they were strong leaders. The problem with this was that when the revolution came and they were replaced, the institutions were weak. And the new guys, the people around Nikol Pashinyan, they didn't have the same charisma, the same knowledge, and the same influence over institutions such as the army. So the result was that there was indeed a leadership gap, not only within the political leadership, but also the military was not used to be autonomous from the political leaders. And this played a role in the way Armenian army did not manage the war in 2020. So that's one part. This is very important, and this is what I describe in my chapter in the book Defeat. Now, on the political level, there's another issue, which is a phenomenon that exists not only in Armenia, but also in Georgia. We saw it recently in Hungary, which is very strong polarization between two poles, where each side accuses the other of being traitor, enemy of the nation, collaborating with the wrong foreign partner. So one collaborates with Russia, the other one collaborates with the West, and so on and so on. So we saw the same phenomena in Armenia after 2018, and this polarization did not help Armenia to have very cool, information-based debates about policy choices regarding Nagorno-Karabakh, regarding Armenia's diplomacy, regarding Armenia's security issues. And as a result, I think Armenia lost a lot in the last few years. And unfortunately, the same atmosphere is still there. Instead of discussing issues, being informed by data, by facts, by figures, we have very polarized, very emotional political discourse.
Thanks. Before, when you were speaking, we saw one picture of the recent picture of the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, with Vladimir Putin, because there was a recent meeting. The meeting was also interesting because just say that it was clear that both the parties had a different view about the geopolitical dynamics. Also, what Putin said was that, we didn't intervene in your favor because Armenia recognized that Nagorno-Karabakh was part of Azerbaijan. But this happened only, if I'm not mistaken, 2024, right?
Yeah, that's a very lame excuse from the side of Putin. I mean, he chose not to intervene, and he chose to intervene only in November 9 in the evening. So
Okay, but I was at the same time also Pashinyan stated that criticized like the Russian behavior, said that also when Azerbaijan attacked not Nagorno-Karabakh but Armenian soil, like the Organization of Security Critic, the ODKB, which is I know in Russian and now I forget in English, the Security Collective Treaty Organization. Sorry. Didn't intervene, and for this is the reason why now the membership of Armenia is frozen, and Armenia is not taking part or any kind of military drills. At the same time, we saw some political parties, and I still remember this fact. And then I want to go on with the question, but I was last years and 2 years ago in Armenia. And 2 years ago, in 2024, if you remember, in June there were some manifestation demonstration against the government, promoted by this movement led by a priest, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, we were there during the protest in front of the parliament. And the day after, we went inside the parliament to have a meeting with local people. It was interesting that the opposition in the parliament, all the members of the parliament from the opposition has a small Nagorno-Karabakh flag on their office. And it's interesting to see how Nagorno-Karabakh still polarize the domestic discourse. So, and it still matters today, even though, and I want to also to ask this question. So on the one side, the oppositions try to refresh, to recall the Nagorno-Karabakh. On the other side, it seems that the polarization of Nagorno-Karabakh now from the government is just to, I don't want to say to forget, but just to silence everything, not to think more about this. Just say that put from the past. So what's your perception about this?
I think the movement led by church symbols that you described what was a huge political mistake. Only people who are illiterate politically can do something like this. Because in June 2024, there was no way to mobilize the population to overthrow Nikol Pashinyan. And this is what the church leaders were calling. And so you don't start a battle when you don't have any chances to win, right? In politics. You do other kinds of battles, not face-to-face battle with the state. And as a result, not only the church became an enemy of the state, and the consequences of which we see up to now. Now the state is attacking the church, because exactly the church in 2024 attacked the state, but also back then in 2024, in this Save Tavush movement, most of the people who were coming to these demonstrations were refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh. So these were really desperate people. And the opposition politicians were using these people for their purposes. And as a result, not only the church became the enemy of the state and they lost, but also the population, the refugee population from Karabakh, became antagonistic with the state. And now there's this very nasty anti-Karabakh, anti-Artsakh propaganda coming from circles close to the state. And this is very dangerous. So I think that whole movement was politically wrong and led to so many losses internally. And it needs to be studied by Armenian politicians and analysts so that they understand that don't repeat this kind of mistake. This is not possible.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with you. So in your research, in your books, also articles, you know that losing the Artsakh on Nagorno-Karabakh, marked also the collapse of these political ideas of Armenia's independence, like at the beginning was established, also fabricated during the 90s. So because Nagorno-Karabakh Artsakh was really important since the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. I still remember when I was in Stepanakert, and then I went to Yerevan. It was for me, and it was in the previous administration under Sargsyan. So my feeling was that Yerevan and Stepanakert were speaking the same language, and also Yerevan usually baked the Stepanakert, but now it's not like this. Also because there is not anymore Nagorno-Karabakh. So the question is, Armenia is looking for another national ideology or national identity, or that previously centered on Artsakh. And this is one question. The other question is also how the diaspora, because the diaspora is really active, the diaspora is active in the Middle East, as you said before, but also in the West, like in France, in Italy, and North America, and how the diaspora will react on this losing of identity or ideology.
I mean, you are right. Armenia is looking for an ideology, and Nikol Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, has put forward an ideology which he calls real Armenia. And I think, again, this is a mistake. Armenia doesn't need ideology. Armenia needs to understand what happened. And real Armenia of Pashinyan basically is a confession that Armenia lost. Armenia lost Karabakh. It's nothing else. I mean, in real Armenia, there's nothing other than saying that we lost Karabakh, so let's pay attention to what we have, which is the Republic of Armenia. But and he links this with the idea of sovereignty, that what is important is that Armenia is a sovereign state. But probably Pashinyan doesn't know that there was a whole debate in the 1980s, especially in 1988, around the idea of sovereignty. When the Karabakh movement started, so Armenia's pro-independent movement, it was called Karabakh movement because it was a movement to defend Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And the idea of sovereignty came only after the anti-Armenian pogroms in Sumgait and other places. And the argument was that we need to have a sovereign state to defend the physical existence of ethnic Armenians. So today, the same debate, ethnic Armenians, meaning that Armenians in Karabakh. Now, today, the same idea, the same concept of sovereignty is being repackaged to say that let's forget Karabakh. But this is not honest because you cannot forget. But what you have to do is to have a serious and honest debate of what happened. Why Armenia lost Karabakh? What went wrong? Was it the military strategy? Was it the alliances Armenia chose to be in? Was it the balance of forces changing? I mean, you need to have an explanation. And for the moment, Armenia doesn't have an explanation. And instead, they have ideologies. And I think that's not helpful. We are not anymore in the age of ideologies. We are in the age of pragmatic solutions to very concrete questions. Now, you are right. In the diaspora, there's one trend. Not all diaspora. Diaspora is very complex with different political colors, trends, and so on. You mentioned Middle East, Italy, France, USA. These are very different countries, and diasporas in these countries are very different. But there's one political party, which is the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Tashnak Tsutyun, which is today in very sharp contradiction and opposition with Nikol Pashinyan. And they have a certain ideology of Armenian cause, which not only puts forward the question of Karabakh, but also insists that Armenia cannot forget what happened in 1915 in the Ottoman Empire, the Armenian genocide, and that Armenia has issues to raise with Turkey. All this is good, but the question is how? Politically, how can you raise these issues today, after the defeat of 2020, so that you don't cause more harm, but you make progress in your political agenda? And for the moment, I think the Armenian political elites, whether in Armenia or in the diaspora, they don't have any concrete answer to this question.
Yeah, thanks. Well, usually when we organize some online courses in geopolitical intelligence analysis, and since we have some in the past some participants from Armenia, what's interesting is that when you talk about geopolitics, you talk about imperative and constraints. And looking at Armenia, the geographical dimensions, there are a lot of constraints and also a lot of imperatives that the government Pashinyan now, in the past, Sargsyan, who knows in the future, should face, should reach. What is also important, we try also to focus on economy, and like sometimes it's interesting because when I show some data like this regarding import-export, many participants who are also students at university, they look and say, oh, come on, import-export, look at the Russia like percentage. And this is also the reason why in the last year and now, Russia also tried to, I don't want to say blackmail, but to put pressure from the economic point of view to Armenia. And at the beginning, you say that Armenia has this free, like this dilemma with the free actors like Russia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. Could we say that now, after what happened in like between Armenia and Azerbaijan, mediated by United States, and also if we look also in the increasing involvement of European Union, this dilemma is not just with three actors, but now as five actors, this dilemma, because I'm thinking also about, for instance, like the trip, like the Trump road for peace and so on. That's and also the fact that Armenia now should also clarify if this part of the Sunni region where this corridor of logistic infrastructure will be established, it will be under the control of the United States. So could we say that now the situation, like Armenia tried to differentiate and diversify its partners, but now it's more complicated from the political dilemma point of view?
Yes, you're right. I mean, Armenia does not have much choice, so Armenia should try to, have better relations with Turkey. But all these discussions about the middle corridor, that the South Caucasus, that is Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, becomes a major transport corridor for trade between Europe on the one hand and Asian giants on the other hand. All this makes sense as long as there's a war in Ukraine, relations between the EU and Russia is bad, and Iran is sanctioned. But as we know that this situation is very dynamic, few years down the road, 2, 3, 4, 5, things can change. And then this middle corridor becomes meaningless. And probably the Russian leaders, Putin and his friends, they think that the South Caucasus is very easy to manage. That once they solve the problem in Ukraine, which Russia thinks that it's a problem not with Ukraine, but with the West, whatever that means. I mean, this is how Russia thinks. I think strategists in the Kremlin think that they can manage easily the South Caucasus, be it Georgia or Azerbaijan or Armenia. I'm not so sure because we don't know what kind of Russia will emerge after the war in Ukraine. Maybe after Putin, the next leader of Russia will not be an expansionist, will be an isolationist. Maybe the choices and the strategic priorities of Russia might change. So all this remains open. And I think it is very dangerous to have one scenario. And it is better to think that things can evolve in a way we cannot predict. Just imagine in 1989, who could have imagined that the Soviet Union will disappear in 2 years? No one.
Well, there were some guys who wrote from Rand Corporation and analysis, but no one paid attention, and they thought that they were crazy. Yeah. And after 2 years, this guy said, "Okay, at least." I still remember also there was, if I'm not mistaken, Benningsen was a researcher from St. Petersburg. Then he worked for Rand Corporation of the United States. He wrote also interesting papers regarding Soviet Union, also Afghanistan, this and that. And if you read today those papers and those research, it seems that you are reading, that the author wrote just yesterday. What is interesting is that, but sometimes some researcher, are not listened by the by the decision makers. Going back to your books, to your research, I want just that you explain us and clarify an interesting concept. So you compare the second Nagorno-Karabakh war with the Spanish Civil War, if I'm not mistaken, where reactionary forces sought to suffocate a revolutionary experiment. Can you explain more about this concept?
Yes, I think the Second Karabagh War between Armenia and Azerbaijan has two dimensions that was not very much paid attention to. One is that Armenia, as a regime type back in 2020, was just emerging from a revolution. And this revolution happened in 2018. And the 2018 revolution in Armenia was not part of a big wave. It was not like the color revolutions, like touching 4 or 5 countries. It was not like the Arab Spring touching series of countries in North Africa and Middle East. It was an isolated event. And I think we didn't pay attention very much to this fact that the Armenian revolution in 2018 happened in a context where all the other leaders were there for decades and decades. Ilham Aliyev was there since 2003. Recep Tayyip Erdogan was in power since 2003. Putin was in power since 2000. The Iranian leadership was there since, when was it? The late 80s, I don't remember.
1979, the Islamic Revolution.
The revolution was in 79, and Khomeini died, I think, 89, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but let's say that the leadership was there since the beginning, because like the apparatus,
Exactly. So Armenia as a country going through revolution was very much looked with suspicion by all these powers. So that dimension is very important. The other thing is that all these powers learned from the case of the Karabagh War is that any country can attack, start a war, violate all series of international law. Azerbaijani authorities like to mention one law in the big book of international law, which is their right to territorial integrity, as if international law has only one article, and that this article gives them the right to violate all the rest of international law, which they did in the Karabagh War. They started the war. Basically, international law is based on the idea of not to start wars. They targeted civilians, they violated hospitals, they cut to pieces civilians that they captured, and so on. And all the major actors that were watching this war, including Russia, concluded that international law doesn't matter anymore. And if Aliyev can go and take Karabakh, I also have the right to send my tanks and take Kiev. And basically, there's a parallel there between what happened in Spain between 1936 and 1939, where the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, they supported Franco's military adventure, and they overthrew the Republic in Spain. And this was an introduction to the Second World War. I think there's this kind of link between the events in Karabakh and what happened later in Ukraine in 2022.
Thanks for this interesting, overview. But I still remember when everything happened at the beginning in 2020, during COVID pandemic, because COVID-19 pandemic. I still remember that we were following this the events, and we stayed. I and also my colleague Silvia Botuk, we stayed that what happening there could become like a starting point for other actions in the world. And then we had the Ukraine, and then we have other events, and now we have also what is happening in the Middle East with Iran, USA, Israel. So it seems that now we are in the era not of international law anymore, but more like the military power law, let's say this, because everything seems that all the problem issues of confrontational conflicts that we tried to manage during the 90s, the first decades of the 21st century with international law, now they are managing with military power. So, and there is just an exception in the first decade of 2000, not exception, several exceptions. In the first decade of 21st century was like Georgia, if you remember, like what we called the Russian-Georgia War, but in the like people they call also the South Ossetian Georgian War, like in the region, and of course Afghanistan and Iraq. Also, we cannot deny this. We cannot deny this. So it's interesting. It's interesting because now we are experiencing the consequences of what's happening. And I would just to close this interview, this dialogue, like okay, in the beginning of May there will be the Yerevan Dialogue of 2026. This is like the, if I'm not mistaken, the second editions, or yeah, probably the second editions of the third edition, the Yerevan Dialogue. Last year we were with Sylvia Voltuk there. This year just Sylvia Voltuk is going into Yerevan. My question is that now, at this moment, with the situation also in the Middle East, so and also what you told us regarding the imperative, the constraints, the limits of Armenian domestic and foreign policy, how this kind of event or how could be used by the government, or can also give the governments an opportunity, or is it just something that's, just to show to the electorate something for the next parliamentary election in June?
I think Armenia has this opportunity today, has time, but should not waste the time it has, because in the last years we saw the weaknesses of the Armenian political and system and the administration. In 2018, the revolution happened because the political system in Armenia is not mature enough to go through selection of leaders through elections. So Armenia has a democratic problem that it needs to address. And I'm not sure this is being done to the full-fledged level. So that's one thing. And then in 2020 war, we saw that Armenian state structures, whether it is the military or the rest of the administration, they are not modern, efficient enough. And the time Armenia has now, it needs to reconsider its recent past. It should reconsider the promises of the revolution, which was modernization, fight against corruption, democratization. And Armenia needs profound reforms. But I'm not sure Armenia is going through this process at the moment.
Thanks, Vicken, for these insights and for your opinion, and also for sharing with us part of your research, your investigations. So I would like to thank you again because it was very interesting, and also suggest people to read the books. That's 44th Day of Karabagh War and also Defeat. Thanks again, and thanks to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, and I wish you and all our viewers a good evening, and let's stay in touch. And tomorrow we will have another live streaming, but for the Italian audience, we will talk about Middle Eastern crisis and also what is happening in Europe. And we will try to address several issues and several risks. So thanks again, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Not